Hi, I'm John. Welcome to Edgetone Studios. This studio is about a 600 square foot addition on my home, and it was pretty well years in the making for me. So, because it wasn't the first studio I built, but it was the first studio that I built well, I thought I would share the process by which this was constructed. Now, I learned a lot, and I know that many of you who are watching this type of a video are either interested in building a studio of your own or have already built one or are just interested in how other people have gone about it. So I thought I'd share this story of how the studio came to be and show the construction process and all the progress along the way. Now, during the build, I took a lot of photos, but I didn't really take much in the way of video because that would have really slowed down my efforts to get the studio completed, and that was my main goal. But I do have enough photos that I thought what I'd do is put together a slideshow montage of the process and tell the story of what happened with some narration. So let's get started. In 2007, I turned our small one-car garage into Edgetone Studios and ran that as a part-time business while I worked in the field of IT networking support. This was our jam space, and I did some recordings in here. I did some music with my kids. And I had always intended that once I retired at 55, because that was the goal, I would do music full time. So fast forward to 2017, and we're working our government jobs, and we've just paid off our beautiful arts and crafts style house that we've lived in for nearly 15, 16 years. Built this beautiful deck out back, had this retaining wall done. I'd built my studio. We'd done all this work. We were a couple years from retirement. I was looking forward to moving in to the studio as my main space and getting ready to do recording. Figured it would be about 2 more years. And one day, over dinner, my wife says to me, "Oh, with the real estate market so nuts in Victoria, wonder how much we could sell our house for. Because then we could move up island where the real estate's cheaper, pocket the change, and retire early." And within 2 weeks of that conversation, our house was on the market. It sold within 2 days, and we had a month to find a new home. And this is what we found. A house built in 1968 that checked almost zero of the boxes we had on our list. We wanted a place that was smaller than what we had lived in before. This was bigger. We wanted a smaller yard. This one was twice the size of the one we had. We wanted something that didn't require a lot of fixing up, and this thing needed everything to be fixed up. However, what it did have was the potential for a studio addition. There was a carport with a driveway heading to the back street that we didn't really need to have because there was already a front driveway, and we were already looking at the possibility of subdividing the yard and using that subdivision sale to fund part of the studio as well as the renovations that were sorely needed. So in September of 2017, I began demolishing the basement and starting the upgrades while my wife finished up her job for another month or so. And then both of us worked on fixing up this house for the next 3.5 years. It was a hell of a lot of work. This rock wall in the rec room just about killed us. It did destroy my wife's knee for all the rock that she hauled up those stairs. But eventually the renos were finished. We'd got a bedroom and a bathroom done, and the rec room, and a little office. And we'd built a bar area in the rec room so that we could use it as a kitchenette while we moved upstairs and started on the kitchen. And months later, we had a finished laundry room. We had a finished kitchen. Our stairs were done. The front door was replaced. The transom above the front door was replaced. The dining room was done. We simply had a bedroom, a bathroom, and the living room to update. And I started itching to build the studio. Now, I'd done some cedar on the front of the house to modernize it a bit, and this became part of the design feature for the front of the studio as well. So now we get to January of 2020, and our subdivision process has just wrapped up, so we're getting ready to sell the lot. And I decide to go out for a request for proposal for studio designs to do this studio properly. I didn't want to spend tens of thousands of dollars working on this space and not have it sound fantastic. So I laid out some design objectives, the primary one being a wonderful sounding control room that was large enough to have clients in to listen to mixes, with a window viewing into a tracking room, and a tracking room that was at least live enough to get some good sounds out of it, but nice and isolated from the noises of the outside neighborhood. Hopefully a vocal booth or isolation booth, with a bathroom and required plumbing and some sort of front entry to come in through, and all the HVAC and electrical that might be needed for the design. I also included a drawing of our existing house, as well as a potential layout that I'd sort of come up with when I was thinking about this over the last 3 years. And when it was all together, I sent this out to all the major studio building architectural firms I could find on the internet, of which there are about 7. Now, I really didn't know what to expect, having not done an RFP for my own personal business before, but I was hoping to get some responses in the next month when it closed. But instead, within hours, I was getting calls from all of these studio design firms, basically telling me that my proposal was fantastic, one of the best they'd ever seen, and that I in no way had enough money to do this. So to say I was disappointed in this was an understatement. I was pretty well devastated, thinking we'd done all this and I can't find someone to design my studio. I'd looked locally, I'd found a few people, but nobody who seemed to have the real qualifications I was needing to do what I wanted to do. And my budget had been 100,000 Canadian for this is an addition on the house. I assumed that was enough to get the exterior built and for me to build the interior. But they were saying that was far too little. And when I was trying to get an idea from them of how much the plans would even cost, none of them would really say, although I got a little bit of an indication from one of them that it would be in the $20,000 to $30,000 range just for the plans. So at this point in time, I got back to work on our renos and continued to think about how I might be able to find someone to do a proper design, when suddenly I remembered the old audio studio design forum that John L. Sayers ran. So I reached out to John Sayers via email with my proposal, and very quickly got a response from him, and he said yes, he could design it for me, and that it would be 7,000 Australian dollars, which was slightly less in Canadian dollars and a hell of a lot better than 20 to 30,000 US. So I engaged John in the design process. Now, he wasn't going to do the exterior. He couldn't do the local building codes, so he would design the space based on the size of the addition. So I found a local firm who had some free time in our crazy busy island building boom market that's still going on, and got David Colson Design Group, who's a local design firm here in the Cowichan Valley, to do the exterior design. And within a couple months, between the two of them, I had these designs together. Now, David Colson Group did an excellent job of making the addition look like a seamless part of the house by matching the cedar that I'd done at the front of the front door. And we had to go back for one change, which was that the original roof line was just going to match the house, but the peak needed to go the other way for what John Sayers was proposing. But in the end, that made the house look even better. And the interior plans were fantastic. I was going to get a great looking control room, isolation from the house, an entry, a bathroom, and even a little kitchen area. And the entry could also act as a little ISO booth, although it wasn't fully isolated for sound purposes. So with the plans in hand, I began the process of applying for a building permit and decided I could get out and start deconstructing our carport. And in the evenings, I'd come and look at the studio plans and this cool 3D model that I got sent and just imagine how amazing it was going to be to have this space and wonder if I was really going to be able to afford it or not. But I got to starting on the deconstruction, and then we hit the first roadblock. Birds. Some robin had laid some eggs in a nest on some doors we had stored in the carport. So I got back to working on our interior while I waited for those eggs to hatch and the birds to move out. But soon the bathroom was finished, and it looked great. And meanwhile, out in the carport, the eggs had hatched. So while I waited for those birds to grow, I started disassembling the back porch, which used to hold a hot tub. Then I used the wood that I'd salvaged to build some raised beds for my wife's gardens out front, which turned out great. Meanwhile, back in the carport, those little birds are growing day by day. So I started on the smaller roof section that stuck out from the carport. It used to house firewood and keep it out of the rain. And I figured I could do that without disturbing these cute little birds, who were getting bigger by the day. So I started reclaiming some of the wood from the roof. And meanwhile, those birds were growing. And by the time I was done, they had left their nest. I could finally start the major work of taking down the carport. Removing shingles, ripping off sheets of particle board, and then dealing with planks and planks and planks of old-growth wood. And then there were these massive beams that were sitting on hollow brick pillars that it was amazing to me were still standing. Well, I tried dropping one by sawzalling off one end near the house, and the bounce back from dropping that beam was vicious enough that I realized this is not safe. So I asked the contractor who was excavating for our neighbor's construction behind us if he would take 15 minutes out of his day to clamp onto the beams while I cut them. So in short order, he had done that, moved them out to the side, and then knocked down all the pillars for me. Then I spent the next few weeks salvaging bricks from the pillars. My neighbor came and helped. We spent hours chipping away at bricks and saving which ones we could, which later came into use. And at the front of the carport, I found these old oil barrels and metal holding up the front planters, which was interesting construction technique, so I had to deal with those as well. And meanwhile, I'd lined up a contractor to do the build, and my building permit had come through. Our neighbor's house was well on its way, and I had a nice clean site ready for construction. So during the summer, while I was working on that, there was a bunch of other stuff going on. We were living through a pandemic. Everything was basically in lockdown. Then my mom passed away in July, and we were dealing with that. And because I was executor of her will, I was now starting to deal with her possessions, which included 2 houses to have to deal with. And first time ever dealing with an estate. And then our cat died. So it was a pretty tragic time. And I just kept, when I could, working away on getting the site ready. I was chipping those bricks. I called my contractor as soon as the building permit came through and found out that he no longer could do my build. So it wasn't a great August going into September. It took a while to get the bricks all chipped, so that gave me something to do in between dealing with possessions and legal documents and filings and things. And meanwhile, I looked around to see if I could find someone else, and a neighbor had some work done, and there was a sign outside his house for a contractor, so I called that guy up, and turned out he was able to start in January. So I thought, okay, at least next year I can get this studio built. And then late November, he gave me a call and said, hey, something just got canceled. We can start next week. And late in November, I think it was the 26th, the trucks rolled up and they began to dig up our front yard to put in a temporary driveway, because the ground was now so soggy that we needed crushed gravel for the dump truck and cement trucks and other vehicles to get up to the site. So although this was an unwelcome addition to our front yard, including this giant mound of dirt, work was finally progressing. They started ripping up the old concrete where the driveway used to be at the back, digging out all the old brick and any of the other foundation work that was there. Then they dug up the ground and started building the forms for the footers. And then they had to come and pour more crushed gravel because the gravel they used was not thick enough. But at least now the cement truck could show up and pour the footers. And once those were set, they were able to start building the forms for the foundation walls. Now they look huge at the front of the house, but that's because they dug down quite a bit to build those footers. And the layout was taking shape. I could get a sense of how big the space was going to be. But we were being very careful in our laundry room not to go too close to the back door, because it was being held up by several blocks and a jack sitting on some of the remaining dirt. Soon the cement truck was back, this time with a big pump, and they were pouring the foundation for what would be my new studio. And once that was cured, they did the backfill and then sprayed gravel in with the gravel sprayer. And then they used their small front end loader to tamp everything down and get the site level for getting ready for the framing. And there's the plumbing you can see sticking out there for the toilet. Of course, it was soggy and wet because it was the rainy season. Thankfully, we don't get too much snow in our winters. And they were able to quickly start on the framing. Now the laundry room was properly being held up by a big LBL sitting on a metal beam. And we were secure that our laundry room was not going to fall down. They got the sill plates in and started getting the corners ready to go up. And then the snow arrived. Unexpectedly, but thankfully it only prevented them from working for one day. And then they were back at it. And quickly the building was starting to take shape. And in the evenings, I'd go out and check the site and see how it was looking and take some measurements. And thankfully I did, because I determined that the door between the hallway and the tracking room was in the wrong place. It was off by a few inches, which wouldn't have allowed for the wall between the tracking room and the control room to be built. So they quickly rectified that. But it was a very wet winter, and we were having some pooling of water, so we had some pumps going, and we found some other creative ways to redirect water away from the site. So all in all, that was a minor issue. Then the trusses arrived, and this was one of the few times I thought to actually take a video of something that was going on, because who doesn't like watching a truck lift giant pieces of wood far into the air for your new roof of your new studio? I mean, it was a pretty exciting day. So these trusses were pre-ordered based on the plans for the studio. But once they were installed, we found out that the ridge line that connected to the house from the new line of the studio was incorrectly measured by the original designer. So that had to be basically thrown aside, and they had to manually build the ridgeline that connected the two pieces together. But they got that sorted out. That comes later. And I don't think I'll show you the entire truss video because, I mean, how long do you want to watch this for? But maybe just a few more seconds. They're almost there. Okay, we'll watch the whole thing. So, of course, it doesn't take very long for trusses to get installed. So within the day, they had put up the first set of trusses. That was the new roofline for the studio. And then they started sheeting that. And then working on that ridge line to connect the house. And they had to adjust the pitch a little bit because there were some issues with that. But they were really great contractors. And then the cedar beams arrived for the back. And while this was going on, I was poring over the plans, planning the cabling layout and where keyboards are going to go and such. There was a lot to do. And soon the roofline was all complete and sealed up. And they started digging up the front yard again, this time to put in the sewage connection and the perimeter drain connection, and made more of a mess of our yard. And in the back, the cedar beamwork was coming along, and it was looking fantastic. They just did an amazing job. This guy was a fantastic joiner. And inside, I decided where the conduit was going to go. We'd put that down with insulation. And then the cement truck arrived for the final time to pour the slab. And that, of course, took a day of work, a long day for them. And soon there was a beautiful slab in the space. Once that was cured, I got out in the space and took some photos. And the only things left were to install the windows and the doors so that things could be locked up and the contractors would be on their way and I'd take over. And it wasn't long until we'd done that. The doors were installed, the windows were installed, and it was time for me to start ordering supplies. So by the time I was past the keys to my own studio, an entire year had passed since I first went out for the request for a proposal. I was hoping that by this point in time I would be well on my way to finishing the interior, but that was not the case. I'd spent about $90,000 so far on the build. My original budget had been $100,000, so obviously I had no clue how much this was really going to cost. I'd never built an addition on a house before, let alone one that was a studio build. In part 2, I will cover how I build the interior of the space, including all the acoustical treatment and the soundproofing, and some of the crazy steps I had to go through to get certain things done, plus how everything was connected up at the end. So I hope you enjoyed the studio build video so far, and stay tuned for whenever I get around to completing part 2. Thanks for watching.